Jennifer, welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm so delighted to have you as my guest today, and I'm so excited for what this conversation is going to hold. Lots and lots of topics to discuss, and a huge area of interest to me. Do you want to introduce yourself to listeners, tell them a little bit of a flavor of what you do and how you got into doing what you're doing?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I'm Jennifer Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Scribe. That's scribehow.com. We are a productivity SaaS company based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but we've got teammates around the world now. I originally started my career as a management consultant at McKinsey, which functionally meant I spent most of my time 9 to 5 in operations centers, trying to figure out how to make them more productive. If you've ever done any kind of like optimization, organization type work as a consultant in an ops center, the name of the game is you go in and you try to figure out who's the best agent in this ops center. And you go and sit next to them and you befriend them and you say, hey, what are you doing differently? Why are you performing better than everyone else? And they would pull out a really thick binder and thunk it down on the desk. I'm dating myself. This is back when people used binders, like 15 years ago. And they would go,
that made total sense to me when you said that. I'm like, what do people use now? Google Docs and Slack, like
back in the day when we printed things out.
Yeah.
And they would go,
when we printed things out single side, I remember those days, and then they brought in double side and no color printing, only black and white. And yeah.
I remember how much faster it came out. I'm like from the inkjet days, where it would take like 3 minutes to get a single or even like laser dot. Do you remember those?
Yeah. Now you're going back far.
Oh yeah. Dial-up internet. We could go down nostalgia lane.
Oh yes.
But agents would say, hey, here's what I was trained to do, right? It took a while for me to like memorize what's in this manual. Usually you have like 2-3 weeks, just kind of people trying to train you on this stuff. They're like, but you know what? I found 30 shortcuts instead. And here's what I do differently. And my team would write that down in PowerPoint and we'd sell that back to our clients for a whole bunch of money. And I always thought at the time, like, gosh, if that person had just had a platform, a way to share what they knew how to do, they could have had a really big impact on that ops center, right? They didn't need me and my Lenovo ThinkPad writing it down for them. And especially in a lot of these ops centers, we would see turnover of almost 100% in a given year. So you're talking about like pretty high training costs, people who are clearly not very engaged in their jobs and can understand why. They're like alt tabbing between 10 different screens all day long, just trying to remember what they're supposed to be doing and getting through it quickly. And you've got people who have figured out better ways of doing things, but that's not getting shared across anyone else. And so there's no kind of innovation happening. And I always thought like, God, that feels like a pretty obvious problem. Like someone should solve that someday, right?
Yes.
And I just kind of went on my merry way. I went to Harvard Business School, continued consulting for a bit, eventually found my way, living in the Bay Area. I got seduced by technology and startups. So went over to the venture capital side and spent a lot of my time talking to buyers of enterprise software in that role. I got really curious. Why do people buy software? What problems are they trying to solve? What problems still exist that software hasn't solved yet that it should? And I kept hearing the same theme over and over again. Just people would say, gosh, I have all of these like fancy tools. We can talk about automation and all these things, but like at the core of the day, my people are showing up to work 9 to 5 and their fingers on keyboard and they're creating value for my company. And that's great. I have an entire HR department that thinks about like how to optimize that talent and what they're doing. But what about the things they know how to do? Like that walks out the door every day at 5 p.m. And I got to hope it comes back. And I try to capture it from those people, but that's not a fun ask. If I tell someone like, hey, take some time away from your job and please write down what you know how to do. Right. Even though functionally people end up spending a lot of their time sharing that, usually not even something as scalable as writing. Right. Usually it's like,
what's springing up for me is it seems like you're kind of writing yourself out of a job then. So if you write about how you do your job, then no, I don't mean that they don't need that person anymore, but and not that it makes the job obsolete, but it could be that gets passed on to someone else and quite easily. And are you just disposable to the organization then?
I get that concern sometimes from folks, but then we go and talk to users. So spoiler alert, our software makes it really easy to capture and share what you know how to do. And I can talk more in a second about how that works. But we get that concern when I tell people what we do. And then I talk to my users and none of them ever raise that as a concern.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what they say to
Interesting.
me?
Yeah.
You know what they say to me instead? They're like, gosh, I constantly get asked how to do this thing. I'm spending a lot of my time on Zoom or someone's if we're sitting in person, tapping my
Yeah.
shoulder. Hey, quickly, can you just show me how? Or I'm writing out emails, trying to explain
Yeah.
things to people. These are folks in companies who are helpful people and they're knowledgeable people. Oftentimes they're, say your most tenured expert employees and they want to be helping others in how to
Yeah.
do something, right? But it's a serious tax on their time, and that's a problem for them, obviously. But it's a really big problem when you multiply it across all the people in your company.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and
And the amount of
so it
time that
becomes
it
like
takes. Yeah.
exactly, and
Mm.
now you've got two people on both sides who are doing something that's very unscalable, which is this
Yeah.
constant interrupt driven. Hey, wait, can you show me? How do I? Can you just? Sorry, 1 second, quickly. Can you explain to me how to do this? Right? How
Yes.
many of us hear that
I'm
so many
sure
times a
so
day?
many people listening today can relate to that, because I certainly can relate to that. And I suppose I never thought it was a problem. It's a way of building relationships, but with the amount of time that it takes, especially as you gain expertise in a specific area, the more and more questions that come your way is pretty astounding.
I love that you said that you never thought it was a problem because I think that's exactly it. It was like a problem hiding in plain sight
Yeah.
because we just accepted this was the cost of doing business, of working. Oh, well, of course, I'm not going to know how to do everything. Like, of course, I'm going to have to ask people, or people are going to have to ask me all the time, and I'm going to repeat myself a lot. Right. That's just sort of the way it is. And when we were all in person together, that usually was someone like tapping you on the shoulder, popping their head over the cubicle. And it's like also kind of a social visit. And so you say, oh,
Mm.
I don't really mind that, I just got interrupted by what I'm doing. There's a huge cognitive cost to that, by the way.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
sort of say, oh, that's just is the way it is. And then we went remote, with COVID. And I think it just became even more apparent to people, which
Yeah.
is instead of that friendly head popping up right next to you, it's like, it's that notification on Slack. It's that
Yeah.
additional email. It's that one more Zoom meeting, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And you look at estimates of what this takes. I used to work at McKinsey for 7 years, so I look at their research, and their research suggests that people spend 20% of their time, 1 in 5 days of a work week, just
Wow.
trying to find answers on how to do something or explain to someone how to do something. So those fun little small interruptions add up to something that's really, really big. And you're
Yeah.
totally right. Most people don't even think that it's a problem until you kind of point it out. And then they're like, well, wait a minute. Yeah, you're kind of right. That does happen a lot. So a fun exercise for everyone, just kind of like, tomorrow when you're at work, think about how many times you get interrupted by someone asking you how to do something, or you yourself trying to figure it out.
I think that's a great exercise and really practical as well for people to just have a think, or throughout the day, just count, like if you're in a German beer garden and you're adding like the little dashes to your beer mat, so you know how many beers you've had, so you know how much to pay at the end. So if you're doing dashes throughout the day to say, well, how many times have I been asked about, and you might think about what is it that you are being asked about as well. So it's so interesting. And I never knew it was a problem. And so I suppose the first thing that I'm kind of thinking is, how would that differ to something like sharing information on the likes of Slack, or instructional videos, or having a Google Doc with SOPs, like standard operating procedures and things like that? Talk to me about how it's slightly different to that.
Yeah. So there's two kinds. I like, you kind of could paint a spectrum, right? I'm going to try not to get too philosophical, but I think about this a lot in the world of software. You could sort of paint a spectrum, right? Of like, how ephemeral is the communication? Is it something that's very referenceable and exists over time? That's something like your wiki or your Google Doc. On the other hand, and those tend to take longer to produce, right? Like
Okay.
someone
Yeah.
has to sit down. It's quite manual. You really, if you're writing an SOP, you are literally copy pasting screenshots. You're writing it out.
Yeah.
It's probably taking you anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 days, depending
Mm.
on how detailed it is. Right.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have things that are pretty low friction, really easy to do. They don't take a lot of time. And that would be like sending someone a Slack, right? Or hitting a quick Zoom, just taking a really quick Zoom meeting. Those kinds of tools have done a really great job of reducing the friction. It's so much easier to do. You just press a button and boom, here you are. You type a sentence and boom, it's sent to someone. but those are not referenceable communications,
Mm,
right? If I ask you how
mm,
to do something in Slack or you give me some kind of information, like it's probably gone forever. I get it. I get it
yeah.
that one time and then that's it. It's buried in our drive. So with Scribe, we thought about how do we make something that is really low friction and easy, but endures over time. And when it comes to documentation, which is basically, capturing how to do something, sometimes I feel like documentation is a 4-letter word for people because they think about that, 3-hour experience of manually writing out something they already have
Yes.
figured out how to do. It's like not even the
Yeah.
fun problem solving, right?
Yeah.
But it actually can be quite important. And we said, well, what if we could make documentation automatic? What if we could
Mm,
watch you do the thing you already know how to do and automatically write out step-by-step written instructions with screenshots? Technology makes that possible today. Like, what if
wow.
we could make documentation as digital exhaust? It's just the byproduct of you doing what you already know how to do. And so that's what we've created with Scribe. I mean, very simply, it's just so folks know, it's desktop application, browser extension, doesn't matter. You click the record button, you do some process. So like you're a salesperson, you're in HR and you've got to add onboard a new employee into Workday or something, right? Or
Mm,
whatever your HMS is. You click record and you just onboard that new employee. When you're done, you click stop record. And Scribe will auto generate step-by-step written instructions with screenshots on how to onboard a new employee into that HMS system. So
wow.
you don't have to do any additional work. And we said, well, what kind of like cool unlock would that be in the world if now the best of what everyone knows how to do is automatically available to everyone else, and it didn't take any additional time for that expert to share what they knew how to do? What if you made sort of their special know-how around best practices, or even just how to use a new tool that you're rolling out at your company, or a process that has changed? What if you made that immediately available to everyone else in a way that didn't take any time away from that expert's job? What if you could scale the best of what everyone knows how to do to everyone else?
Mm,
So we get really excited about what that means as an unlock. First, for that person, they're saving that one day a week, which is a non-trivial amount of time. But then for that organization too, because oh my gosh, now if you go back to my, ops centers back when I was, in my 20s as a consultant, like now you don't need a Jennifer with a ThinkPad running around and capturing what everyone's saying. Like now it's just automatically available. What could you
mm,
do with that?
yeah. 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 I mean, this opens up a whole host of questions for me. And like, frankly, I'm sold. And I'm like, this podcast episode is not sponsored by Scribe, by the way. But I'm sold already. I'm like, this sounds incredible. One of the questions that I have, and this is kind of maybe going off topic slightly, but like if you're saying it's the best people and it's best practice, how do you determine, or I suppose, are people putting their hands up and saying, I know the best way to do this, or I know the fastest way to do this, or I'm the expert in this area, or how do you determine who is the right person to actually record the process?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Because if you think about even just the analog of how this happens today in a company, right? Like, hey, I'm new to a company, or I've been here for 5 years and I just got to do something and I'm not quite sure how to do it. One of you maybe like you go to a wiki or something to try to find the info. Odds that you find it are pretty low because
Mm,
most of the time processes are not documented, right? So then it really becomes like, who do I ask? Do I ask someone? Do I try to figure it out on my own? And if I'm going to ask someone who becomes a really important question.
yeah.
And you'll find that oftentimes there are these like hubs of knowledge of people within the company, and everyone knows to go to that person for this kind of question.
Yeah.
But often, also people will just ask like, who's the person sitting next to them? Or who's the person who is friendliest or is like
Mm,
fastest to respond to Slack, right?
so
And
true.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
you almost have like this gray market of information, which is
Love that description.
it's pretty
It
inefficient,
could be
right?
good information. It could be bad information. You don't really know.
That's right. That's right. And like sometimes it's no information because you couldn't
Okay.
figure
Yeah.
it. You ask someone and they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't know who you asked for that. You sort of throw your hands
Uh,
up and that is what it is. So it's a really hard problem to know, where do you go? Who do you go to? And we think about solving that in a bit more of a crowdsourced way, frankly. We've got some customers who will say like, no, I know who my people are, who know how to do things. And like,
Yeah.
they are the
Yeah.
ones I'm going to ask to create Scribe. There's always like a few of those people in a company. It's always so interesting to me when I talk to folks. They're like, we're going to give this to Cheryl. Like, we know that Cheryl's the one who secretly runs this company. We need to make
Yes.
sure that
Love
we
it.
capture what she knows how to do.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about much bigger companies, like, it's hard to identify who those people are. And so what you often see is the best content rises to the top. And we think a lot about how do we design feedback loops and
Yeah.
mechanisms for that, right? So
I was going to say, can you have like upvotes and things like that on?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like that feedback can go to a number of different people, and they can use that information in different ways to, figure out what best practices are.
Yeah. And is it just for processes, or can you use it for like knowledge gathering efforts as well? Or how does that work?
We're really focused on procedural know-how. So
Okay.
there's
Yeah.
all kinds of know-how that's really important to
Yeah.
capture, right? In a company. And I would argue companies think a lot already about, the like sort of what of your job. Like,
Yeah.
okay, you're a salesperson. Great. We're going to teach you like what our product is. We're going to teach you, how to run an effective sales conversation and do
Yeah.
discovery, that sort of thing. Where we often see training, kind of formal training, falls short is then you're like butt in seat. And maybe it's your first week, maybe it's your first year, maybe it's your 10th year. And you got to like generate that report in Salesforce
Yeah.
or something, and you do that like once a quarter. And I don't know, maybe your interface changes, and you're just like, I just got to do this thing. And no one has formally trained you on it. So you're either like Googling, trying to find it, or again, you're asking the person sitting next to you.
Yeah.
So there's all this like informal how that we just assume people will learn on the job by asking each other in this informal peer-to-peer learning. And peer-to-peer learning is great. Don't get me wrong, but you want to save peer-to-peer learning for things that truly require like in-person coaching, right?
Yeah.
That how do you run a great sales
actual
conversation?
human interaction. Yeah. And I'm thinking right now of expense reports, when you have to fill out expense reports like once a quarter or once a month, whatever it might be, however often you have to do it. And like the laborious nature of having to do that, and you forget exactly what you did the last time, and it's not part of your day-to-day activities. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to doing that. If I could refer back to something that did a step-by-step and help me to do that more efficiently without having to disturb one of my colleagues, I think that would be really, really important. And I also presume, Jennifer, that it's really important part of the onboarding process when someone comes, especially in this remote and hybrid working situation, that when someone comes on board, that it becomes, kind of critical for them to be able to learn how to do stuff, but without, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but without having to disturb their colleagues, when they could have much better interactions, more relational interactions rather than transactional interactions with their colleagues.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with, the great resignation. We talk to a lot of companies where like, I've had really big turnover, and it's a double whammy, right? Which is some of my most experienced people left.
Yes.
And so I've lost some of that knowledge. And now I've got some new people coming in the door. And so now the people who've been here for a while are really pinched because they're trying to do all the work of everyone who left. And now you've got all these new people coming in, and they're trying to do like this knowledge transfer to these new people as well. And you want to make sure that the new people have a really great experience coming in, and they're not sitting there at their computers, not sure what to do. There's nothing more disempowering than even that expense report example is such a good one. Like, imagine you're new and you're like, you get the email on Friday, you got to file your expense reports, and you're like, how do I do that?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I'm not going to bother someone because, I've got more important things to ask people.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to sit here for a while and click around and try to figure it out. And, that's okay, but that's not a great experience. And you add up those small things over time, and it's pretty disempowering. And so I think when you're onboarding someone, there's, I think about the why, the what, the who, and the how. Like, what are the key things they have to know how to do? And hopefully they know the why by the time they come in the door. If you run a good recruiting process, they understand like why what you're doing with this company is important. Like, why does this mission matter?
Why the company exists in the first place. Yes.
And why are you hiring me for this role? Why am I agreeing to spend my precious time doing it? Right. I hopefully have already bought into like why this is important. And, maybe even during the recruiting process a bit, you gave me a sense of who I'm going to be working with, who are those people I ask questions to, and what is it that I'm going to be doing. right? And there's usually some kind of formal program when I come in of like, at the most extreme, I've talked to some folks who were, onboarded remotely, especially during the pandemic, for companies that's like sort of all of a sudden were thrust into this. And they were like, I had 2 weeks of pre-recorded videos and I just sat at my computer for 8 hours a day and I watched pre-recorded videos, and it was the worst experience of my life. So, it varies on how companies approach that, but you've got some kind of, training on like, here's what you're going to be doing. Where I often see things fall short is that how, again, of all of that, like, okay, great. You understand what you're doing. You know your purpose, your tasks. Now you're like fingers on keyboard trying to work in our software, and it's different than the one you worked at your previous company. We do things a different way here, and you got to figure out what to do. And again, usually your option is you just rely on that informal learning, and you really hope that you've got like a buddy who's sitting next to you or like is responsive.
And you've got a friend in Google as well.
Exactly. Right. And or you're Googling and you're really good at it. You got to hope it like translates to what you're
exactly.
And that's, that's not an empowering experience for someone coming in.
No, definitely not. And like, I mean, we've talked an awful lot about the software and what it does. I'd love to kind of take a more of a helicopter view of the issues that you see around productivity in general. Anything that's kind of screaming out to you at the moment that needs to be addressed in organizations, whether it's with the client organizations that you work with or more broadly that you're seeing out there.
I'll say something that will probably quite surprise you, given that I am the CEO of a productivity technology company, right? We make productivity software. I think we have too many opportunities to collaborate together in software.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we are suffering from collaboration overload.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is you could spend most of your day, if you look at your calendar and how you spend your time, you've probably got big chunks of time that are spent on Zoom. I mean, if you're like most people, right, you're in like a lot of meetings now. And then you've got email that's coming at you. And then you've got pings on Slack or Teams or whatever it is that you're using, and people asking things. And so you could go full 8-hour workday. And at the end of the day, go, whew, I did so much work today. I'm so exhausted, right? And it's because you were busy all day long. But all you did was communicate with your coworkers, right? Yeah. And maybe that's the entirety of your job, but for most people, there's like another output component to it, right? And so you could go the entire day having helped a whole bunch of people and done a bunch of work, or felt like you helped a bunch of people and certainly like, put a lot of hours into it, but not actually have moved the ball forward on whatever it is that you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do. And so if you go back to kind of like my sort of esoteric chart that I was talking about, of like the fact that we've reduced friction on this communication, so much is great in so many ways. We've bridged gaps. We made it so much easier for companies to hire people anywhere in the world and access great talent, all these wonderful things. People have more flexibility, but it also means it's just so much easier for someone to demand some of your time. Right. Yes. Where it's like, oh, hey, let's just hop on a Zoom together. All right. And go through it. And then you spend, I hear this from my customers all the time. They're like, oh yeah, when I have a question on how to do something or whatever, like, I'll just hop on a Zoom with my coworker and like, we spend the first 5-10 minutes chatting. It's great to see them. And then they'll share their screen and we go through what they're supposed to be doing. And it's great. And I feel good. And I hang up and then I get distracted. And then I go to do that thing they showed me how to do. And I forgot.
Yeah.
And then
I need another Zoom call.
And then I gotta either I tell them I forgot, or I sit there and I try to figure it. And now you've taken 2 people's time for, a pretty chunk, a pretty real portion of their day, in something that's really not scalable. So I always love to think, I'm obsessed with efficiency and productivity. And I love to think about how can you take things and make them scalable, like media, like software. These are things that are infinitely scalable. How can you take some of the best parts of people and what they know how to do and make that scalable?
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. And I'm a huge believer in, in all sorts of efficiency and productivity and all of those. Like even when I worked in corporate, I was so interested in, like, is there a day of the week? Is there a time of the day that we do our best work? And like, how do we be more efficient with our time? And you're so right. I think we're living in such a connected world now, and having so many meetings and so many touch points throughout the day makes us feel like we're really busy, when in fact it hasn't done anything to move the dial on what it is that we're supposed to be doing towards our objectives, towards the company's objectives. So I think it's really, really important. And what I see, like one of the big trends that I see out there with the shift, the future of work, which is happening right before our eyes, there's this shift in mentality away from input in terms of time and energy that we expend at work, and a shift more towards focusing on the outcomes that we achieve, which should have been the case all along. But if you think of people's mentality, it's often that, I worked X number of hours. It's not I delivered X or I produced Y. It was more I worked this number of hours. And is it the Parkinson law, where if you have 2 weeks to complete something, you're going to fill that entire 2 weeks. Whereas if someone says, I want that in 2 days, then you can probably produce the same result in a couple of days within reason. You're not being a perfectionist and trying to make everything all bells and whistles. So I definitely see that trend happening out there. When it comes to these things like getting sort of distracted and feeling like we're busy but not actually kind of being productive, what do you see as the solution to those kinds of things?
Yeah. First of all, I think recognizing it, like you said, is so important. Like even that mindset shift. And, we're a Silicon Valley technology company, and I have to fight it every day with my team, right? Where oftentimes people will say like, oh, I feel like we need to collaborate on this more. Let's bring in, Meg and Tony and Charles. And I have to like, time out. Are there more than 3 people in a meeting? What are we doing? Are we deciding something here? Like, what is the output? Like, we're not bringing more people together in just for the sake of, collaboration, which frankly is motherhood and apple pie. Like, you only collaborate for means to an end. So what is that end we're trying to achieve? So, every time you do have a meeting, meetings are important. I believe like you need to do them, but you need to be really judicious about when you have them. So when you have a meeting, be clear about like, who are the must-have people only versus folks who can just get like a short FYI afterwards. What's the agenda? And in particular, less, what are we going to discuss? And more, what is the outcome that we're going to drive towards? And if you don't have a desired outcome at the end, we're going to make a decision, then you probably shouldn't be having a meeting. You probably have some more pre-work that everyone needs to be doing before you bring everyone together. And then thinking about how, you run your time and your calendar as well. So trying to like create what are some of those blocks of time when you can be more in flow state and focus on what your priorities are. So I try to tell my team, like at the beginning of every week and the beginning of every day, before you open any of your email or Slack or anywhere where people can reach you, which by the way, your inbox is someone else's to-do item that they have locked to you.
100%. Yeah.
So before you get to other people's to-do items, stop and think about like, do only 3 things today. Like, what are the 3 most important things that you get done? And then think about how you're going to put that within your time and start with that first in your day, right? And those are the big rocks. And then you can figure out how you fill the little rocks in between. I worked with a time management coach 20 years ago now. But I imagine her advice is probably still relevant now, where she was like, think about the big rocks in your day. And then when you've got all the small things like responding to emails and notifications and whatnot, chunk it. So only do, I've got a 20-minute session here. And like, that's when I'm going to deal with all of these things. And otherwise I'm turning notifications off. And people know if they need to reach me really urgently, I've got my phone on and they can give me a phone call. Yeah. Because we treat a lot of this asynchronous communication as synchronous.
Yes.
I must
100%.
be responding right now.
Yeah.
And the context switching cost of that, the cognitive load is really high. I think this is another one of those problems that you don't really realize until you stop and think about it. Like, you're working on something, maybe you're starting to get in the flow, you're chewing on some really meaty problem, and then ding, hey, can
and it's so tempting
for you?
Got that
Yeah. And then
dopamine.
you want the dopamine hit because you
Yeah.
as soon as you see the notification, you start thinking about the response. You've already lost,
Yeah.
right? Because you answer it right in that moment because you've already changed the gear and you're starting to go. And that's what I try to do. Like if I've seen it, I already lost. I might as well just like bat it away and be done with it.
Yeah.
And if the worst is if you don't, because then you've seen it, you've thought about the answer, you lost the distraction, and then you still have to come back to it later.
Yeah. It's
So you're
weighing
almost
on
like
your
answering
mind.
it twice.
Yes. Yeah. One of the challenges I see out there all the time is this idea. So it's kind of building on the point that you have. And I love all of these points about, who are the must-have people at a meeting? Because I think the temptation often is just to invite everyone or CC people, and the worry like people might feel excluded, but deciding who needs to be there and what type of meeting it is it a decision? And I love this, what is the outcome? And if you haven't decided what the outcome is, you need to do some more work around that. And then this time blocking. But I think what one of the things I see is that it's easy and it's comfortable and it's reactive to open up your emails and respond to something else that's on someone else's to-do list, because it's easy and it's familiar, rather than sitting and thinking. And I think maybe this is something that people are a little bit afraid of, that if they spend a bit of time actually using their brain and thinking for a while, it takes up so much energy. It takes up, like you said, if you have a big meaty problem that you're getting your teeth into and then you get distracted by it, it's kind of an easy out to get away from that difficult problem that you're trying to solve, and it's so comfortable. Like, do you see that people are falling into these habits of, oh yes, I'm just going to blindly attend this meeting that I probably don't need to be in because that's comfortable and I've been invited to it and I don't really want to say no, or it's easy for me to keep my emails open or to check my emails throughout the day because then I feel like I'm being productive. I feel like I'm doing a lot of work, even if I'm not necessarily reaching my objectives for the day.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I find myself doing this a lot too, which is like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got 20 minutes right now and I could, work on something really hard, or I could just go bat away some emails.
Yes.
And it's so much easier to be like, nah,
It
I'll just
is,
default to
isn't
the
it?
email.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we, for some reason, want to feel really busy. I think we're
there we go.
addicted to
Yeah.
feeling busy. And
when we're busy, we're important, Jennifer. Didn't you know?
Right. Yes. I had to join this meeting. They really care about my opinion. And I'm sure they do, but oftentimes people are pulling people into meetings too, because they don't know who's accountable, and like, you want to spread it around.
Yeah.
That's sort of the natural feeling when you're sort of like, oh, I'm not quite sure we should bring this person in for their opinion, this person in for that opinion. And I try very hard at my company to say one person's accountable for one specific thing. This is your metric. You're the one who owns it. If you want to bring in other people in, you can, that's great. But like, it's you at the end of the day.
It rests on you. It's your decision. And I think that's like, a lot of leaders need to be empowered to make those decisions. And they need not only to be empowered, but reiterated that, look, like you can get people, you can get information from other people, but they're not going to make the decision for you. That's why we pay you good money, because you are here to make those decisions, to make those calls. And if it was the wrong decision, you need to accept responsibility for that as well. So celebrate the wins, but also take responsibility for the losses.
And I don't even worry that much about wrong decisions. I worry about no decisions. So
yes.
Okay, fine. You made the wrong decision. No big deal. You're going to make some wrong decisions. Welcome to being human. At least we made a decision and we tried something and we learned from it and we can move on, versus, death by committee.
This is it. And I think a lot of companies suffer with that, is the committee decision making, where, it's I was going to say by public vote, but you're kind of almost doing a show of hands around the room, and it's a democracy, but that's not what businesses are all about. It's about giving people responsibility for very specific areas, very specific functions, and responsibility for making decisions in those areas.
Right. I want to come back quickly to like, you've got the 20 minutes and it's easier to go and, like just send an email or something.
Yeah.
What I try to do to counter that is, on the days that I'm being good, and I wish I could say this every day, I don't do this every day, but I try to do it most days, when I wake up, I will think about what is it that I want to achieve today? What are my big rock priorities? And I'll like put a Post-it note on my computer. So it's the thing that
I
see.
love a good Post-it note, Jennifer.
So now they're great, right?
Yeah.
Technology at its finest. And so when you've got that 20 minutes now, your brain almost panics because it's like, oh my God, I'm not going to be busy for 20 minutes. What am I supposed to be doing? Am I even important? All these things. But then if you can just quickly look at your Post-it and be like, oh, okay, wait, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Okay. All right. I'm going to focus on this for 20 minutes. You now have like given yourself something to anchor on, which is again, more of your agenda than the communications. And, hopefully over time you get yourself more comfortable with more and more kind of free time. I just saw a really great quote from a founder. I read a lot of, from folks who have, founded and scaled companies, just because I think it's really fascinating and obviously relevant to what I'm doing here. And he said, like, look, when I first started my company, I'd stare at my calendar and it was completely blank because we had no product and no customers. And that terrified me. And I was like, gosh, I can't wait until this is full of all really important things, And then he's like, and then my company scaled and my calendar got really, really busy. And I realized I needed to go back to that state before, because the reason I was able to build a great product that attracted great customers was because I had all of this uninterrupted time when I could really think about what was important and think from first principles. And so I think we talk about it a lot. I hear like a lot of podcasts and things where people are like, create chunks of time on your calendar, free space. But I don't know how many calendars you look at. From like all the calendars I've ever seen of people, it's like double booked blocks everywhere. It looks like Tetris. There aren't any like beautiful wide open chunks of time.
To be honest, I try to do that. I try to have meetings only on a Tuesday and a Thursday and leave Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for stuff. It doesn't always happen, but typically a Monday is fairly free for me for planning the week, for doing that kind of the deep work, the planning, the strategizing. And then Friday, sometimes I have meetings. Thursday is like my podcasting day. So we're recording this on a Thursday. And then Wednesday, again, the deep work and I try not to have calls. But it's also thinking about, like, even if you're having one-on-one calls, what is, going back to what we were saying kind of at the start, what is the reason behind having this one-to-one call? Like, am I answering someone's question that they have about how to do something, or is it relationship building, going back to the purpose of this? And I suppose I would really encourage people to look how you're spending your time. And I do talk, or I have spoken on another podcast episode about this idea of, measuring how you're spending your time. And that's not to share with your organization to say, this is, because oftentimes I think from an organizational perspective, and I've seen this, like when they look to measure how people's time is being spent, it's kind of like to admonish them in some way, to kind of punish them maybe. But this is really for your own understanding, to see like, okay, how much time am I spending on emails? How much time am I spending working on this deck? How much time am I spending in meetings? How much time am I spending chatting? Am I getting distracted? I was going to say, how much time am I spending on social media? But like, are you getting distracted by social media? And be honest about it as well, because it happens to everyone. I think you get, you might get a notification or something like that. I don't have my work emails on my phone. So that's one thing. And I've turned off the notifications on my laptop, so I won't get a notification. I won't say that, that doesn't stop me going in and refreshing and checking, have I gotten any new emails? The dopamine hit, I'm not immune, I'm human too. But like certainly social media notifications and things like that, when they pop up, they are quite distracting. And I've gone through spells of time.
They're designed to be that way. They're designed to be that way.
Yeah.
There's some really smart product managers on the other side who are like, how do I get people to come back more often?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you had to go into a website, and we're talking back in the olden days, back like 15 years ago, when Facebook first came about, and you had to go to a website and you had to log in with your details. You're probably checking it once a day, but now, oh God, I dread to think how often I would check on the various different social media channels. But I have gone through spells where I've taken them off my phone. I've gone through spells where I've turned off notifications. Actually, I don't have any Facebook notifications on my phone at the moment. And so I don't see if I have a new notification. I have to physically go into the app to see if there is a new notification. And my phone is quite often on do not disturb as well. So I don't, but having said all of these and having put all of this into place, it doesn't stop the temptation to want to check your phone to see if you've had any notifications, even if I'm not getting that kind of audio and visual cue that there is something new coming through.
Yeah, it's, I try to, your body will always default to like the lowest friction way. And social media has tried to design itself so it's very low friction. You literally click the button, on your phone, and boom, it comes up with all these shiny images and things that are designed to, attract your attention. And so I try to think about like, what are ways you can add friction? You're trying to make the things you want yourself to do as easy as possible, and the things you don't want yourself to do as hard as possible. So, even like simple things like you're hiding the app. Even if you have it on your phone, it's like all the way on your last page, you got to scroll and it's like nested under another folder.
Love that.
And
yeah.
I've got like a screen time limit, right? So I get 15 minutes a day. Usually I spend it on LinkedIn, and then that's it. And after that, I've got to like do some complicated stuff to make it come back, for longer periods of time. So even just finding like ways to slightly nudge yourself, where you say like, it's like the same concept as healthy eating, right?
Yeah.
Like the bag of potato chips is super easy. It's easier than like cooking a meal
and
that you have to
tasty
grocery shop for and all these things. But like, what if it was flipped? What if you had to make your own potato chips, or you had like a pre-made healthy salad to go? Which do you think you'd eat more often?
Yeah.
Humans default to low friction stuff because we've got so much we're trying to balance in our days. Our brains are so overloaded by everything in modern
decision
society.
fatigue. So if you don't have to make a decision, then it becomes a lot easier. Jennifer, coming back to this idea of the collaboration overload, any additional thoughts on what we can do? Like, is it a case of saying no to meetings? Is it a case of blocking out time in your diary to get that deep work done? What any other thoughts around that whole concept of of too much collaboration, essentially?
Yeah, I think it's both what you can do as an individual, and then if you're a manager or you're thinking about this for a team or a company, like what are the norms and things that you want to role models? We talked about some of the things you can do as an individual, like pushing back on what are the meetings I actually have to be part of. And if you feel like you don't have enough air cover for that, having a conversation with your manager where you pull up your calendar and you say, let's look at my calendar. Look how many meetings I'm in, 15 meetings a week.
Yeah. Which sounds pretty normal.
And like they're an hour each.
Yeah.
And that means I've got X number of hours left to actually do all these things that you and I have agreed on.
Yeah. And presumably there's actions from the meetings and there's pre-work for the meetings as well. Let's not forget that. So, add on a few extra hours for all of that stuff.
Yeah. Can you please help me go through and prioritize? Do I actually need to be in all of these and provide air cover for me? If we decide that I don't need to be in any. And like, as a manager, again, I said, I try to run around. Literally, if I see a room full of more than 3 people in my company, I will walk in and I will be like, hey guys, what's this meeting? What are we talking about? What are we trying to decide here?
I love that as a rule, because it seems like, why would you need more than 3 people in a meeting? Just when, and I'd love from listeners to be challenged on that. Like, are you having these massive, big meetings? Aside from, the kind of the obvious thing that springs to my mind is a town hall, which is, that's kind of not really a meeting. It's more of an announcement.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can think of some exceptions. We do our town halls, or like we had a big kind of brainstorm session on something. Yeah. We said, well, hey, that'd be really fun to have like a few different people from different perspectives around a whiteboard. And the output of this is like clear. It's a brainstorming on these sets of topics. But the ones that I think are the worst are the standing weekly meetings. So, or biweekly or whatever. So, anytime.
Why are we having this weekly team meeting? What is the update? What is the purpose of this?
They say like, oh, I'm collaborative, oh, we should really like,
I'm so busy and important as well.
Right. And like, it feels good and it's what we think is work, but retraining yourself to question it if you're the attendee. And then again, if you're a manager or the person kind of setting the culture for your team,
like
what actually needs to be happening here. And you can role model the same thing on email and Slack and others, where, you know, you can say like, okay, guys, I'm checking it 5 times a day. Right. And if you need to reach me outside of those times, like call my cell phone or
Yeah.
whatever it is, like
Yeah.
for,
Yeah.
for urgent things. And that is what it is. And you now set like a new tone where people don't feel like they have to be constantly responding because that's how they look like they're on top of their jobs, right? Is because
Yeah.
you've changed the cultural norm now.
I read something earlier today actually about that. I think it was, you know, one of these clickbait type of headlines where they talked about Elon Musk saying that he believes you know, that no work gets done remotely. And he's probably right. I think it was the headline. So you're like, oh, that's quite an interesting thing. I'm going to click into that. But what they talked about was this pressure on people to always be on and appear online. Whereas when you're in the office, you might nip out for a cup of coffee. You might stop by someone's desk for a chat, or you might just be away from your desk for a few minutes, and that's okay. Whereas the pressure at home, kind of going back to the point about like being always on and responding on Slack immediately, responding to emails immediately to show, it's like a new form of, it's like digital presenteeism rather than regular office presenteeism, where you're just being seen in the office and therefore you're busy because you're there until 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 9 p.m. Whereas this is, it's always being on because you're at home, and you're at home anyway, especially during the pandemic, I think was a huge issue.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've got people who like, you know, go for a walk with their dog in the middle of the day and they bring their phone and they're like responding to Slacks just so like no one thinks that they're shirking. Right. And
Yeah.
that becomes particularly nefarious if you say, I want to take, like you said, you know, I take my blocks of time when I'm doing work. Right.
Yeah.
And so what our team will do, you can put like little emojis next to your Slack status, like a simple thing. Right. But like people will do like headphones when they're working to indicate
Right.
like,
Brilliant. Yeah. I
I'm
love
heads
that.
down working. When we worked, in person together, we had developed like Post-it note colors, which basically like if you put like red up, it meant like I'm heads down working right now. Please don't
Yeah.
come by my desk and
Yeah. Yeah.
disrupt
Yeah.
me. Right. And green meant like, oh, I'm doing some lighter tasks. Like you're welcome to come by and
Yeah.
interrupt me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And engineers are like particularly notorious for doing this because they really, you have to be quite in flow, heads down when you're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen now, speaking of technology, I have seen that technology exists where you can put it at your desk and you can kind of have a traffic light system to indicate to other people whether or not you're open to being disturbed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But we don't usually do that in the digital world. You just assume everyone's open to being disturbed at any given moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose coming back to productivity in general, is there anything else that you wanted to share before we wrap things up on the podcast today?
I think, you know, people, we talk a lot about productivity. I think people care a lot about it. It scratches the sort of like, again, human itch of like, how do I feel really busy, but like I'm doing really important stuff, and that's good and great. But I would start with like the first question of why are you trying to be more productive? What are you trying to be more productive for?
Yeah.
Like, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And then measure your productivity based on whether you're able to achieve those things. Not like I'm so productive, I collaborated with 15 people today, right? I'm so productive because, you know, I put together like this great presentation that my client loved.
No, I love that. I think that's a really great approach, because I think what I'm seeing is a lot of people struggle how to define what productivity actually means in their organization. And for me, it comes back to, as an organization, why do you exist? What are you here to do? And then as a manager, understanding the contribution that your team makes and being able to translate for each individual within the team what their contribution means in the context of the organization, and the impact that they can have on the organization, and why their role is important. And I think a lot of companies really struggle to do that. And so you don't really understand what being productive means. You're being productive because you're busy. You're being productive because you're doing what you're being told, rather than thinking and questioning what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, and how it's going to move the dial on the objectives, on what the business is trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I'm a technologist, so I get obsessed in thinking about scale, right? So I'm
Yeah.
always trying to think about like, what are the scale points on your time too? Like, where are the places where you can get the most leverage? And think about like, what are the things that uniquely require you at any given moment? And what are the things where you can either replace yourself or scale yourself, right? And
Yeah.
obviously, we think about that a lot with Scribe. Like, how do you scale what you know how to do? So you're not spending time explaining it to everyone one on one, right? But now it's a one to many. And by the way, it's just automatically happening as you're working. But like, where are those opportunities to make things almost automatic or scalable and not a one to one? So if you're putting something that's like really thoughtful and detailed in like a Slack message that's going to one person or like in a one to one meeting, but you think it'd be helpful to other people, you should probably be picking a different medium that's more scalable.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. 100%. Um, Jennifer, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what does being happier at work mean to you?
I had a professor in business school who said, find the thing that you are constantly apologizing for about yourself and find a way to get paid for it.
Oh, I love
um,
that.
so for me, I'm obsessed with efficiency. I mean,
Yeah.
if you were to
I'm
ask my
sorry for being
husband,
so efficient, everyone.
well, I mean, it can be annoying to people. So my husband would say to you, like, we go to run errands and I'm like plotting out our route to make
Yeah.
sure we're not double backing. And, I'm like trying to do 10 things at
Sounds
once.
it
And
sounds like you're my American sister, Jennifer.
it is very American of me to do that. Yes.
I just mean it sounds like you're exactly like me and you're thinking, oh, what's the best and where should I go first? Because that makes more sense. And then I'm not going to hit
Right.
traffic there. And you're trying to work out all of these things in advance so that you can be more efficient and you don't waste time. And yeah.
Right. Right. And, you know, uh, with what I'm doing now, I feel like I have found a way to take that like neurosis and make it my job and make it about
Mm,
like, how do I help other people solve the problems that I
yeah.
care a lot about? And so to me, happier at work, I've had many times in my life when I was not happy at work. I don't think I
Mm,
knew it at the time. It wasn't until I truly was happy at work that I was able to look back and say, oh,
okay.
that was not happiness at work. And to me, it's working on something that I think is really important and where I feel like it is a good kind of fit for what I can uniquely do.
Yeah.
But where it's always pushing me to do more. So I'm uncomfortable every day. And that's, I think,
Yeah.
the best place to be. But I'm very fortunate to work with a group of humans who I feel like have got my back and really support me. So
Mm,
if that's maybe a very long way of saying, like, to me, happy at work means finding your craft, the thing you really care about doing
mm,
and maybe are already good at and want to get excellent at, and being able to do that with a group of humans who you just kind of like working with and who
yeah.
push you to be better.
Yeah. Love that. Love that approach. If people want to find out more about you, if they want to connect, if they want to know more about Scribe, what's the best way that they can do that?
Folks can find me personally on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there, Jennifer Smith. Folks are welcome to try out Scribe, our website, scribehow.com. We have a free product you can create and share and invite teammates unlimited, all for free. We test this. Scribe's used in over 100 countries. We've got users who don't speak English. They're able to create a Scribe and share it with others in less than 4 minutes. So it's just really gosh darn easy. So if you are curious and have 4 minutes, you can check it out on our website, scribehow.com.
Brilliant. Love that. Thank you so much for your time today, Jennifer. Absolute pleasure to chat with you and really, really appreciate all of the insights that you've shared with listeners today. Thank you.
Yeah, this was a ton of fun. Thanks for having me.